morning. Thanks, Mustafa, and thanks for everyone to joining us so early in the morning as the first section of today. And as Mustafa said, that we have fantastic topic and agenda today. And I think the role of data is quite important because yesterday we talk about engagement, we talk about decarbonization, we talk about target setting. No data, nothing will happen, right? So it's quite important to have data, and we all know that when we talk about ESG data, or more specifically climate data, we have quite a lot of challenges, like the access to the data, source of the data, quality of the data, comparability of the data, standardization of the data, etc. These are all the issues. So we now have around 15 minutes to talk about all these important issues, and I hope we can all manage this discussion. I'm the moderator. My name is Pei Yuan. I'm from Beijing. I'm the chairman of Sintao Green Finance, and I also advise UNEP FI's work in China. So we are happy to have 4 ladies here. I'm the only gentleman. And I will moderate the discussion with 4 ladies, and we really have 4 experts in this field. Let me introduce them briefly one by one. From my left side, I think it's Miyako, the Associate Director at CDP Worldwide Japan. And then it's Yongjin Lee, head of Korea ESG Solution and at S&P Global Sustainable One. And then we have Simone, head of product Net Zero Data Public Utility. And then we have Tiange Wei, Asia Pacific Regional Head, Guidehouse and PCAF. So basically, we will have 2 rounds of discussion. First of all, we will talk about the challenge and how we are going to address these challenges. And for the second round, we will talk about the policy and the future trends. So maybe I will start with Tiange from PCAF. I think most people have heard about PCAF, but if you can still introduce a little bit and explain the challenge that you identify when you work with the FIs in the regions and the potential solution or the solution you see in practice, please.
Absolutely, thank you, Pei Yuan, and good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here today, and thank you, UNEP FI, for the invitation to share this panel with our deep experts on ESG and sustainability data. My name is Tiange Wei. I'm the Asia Pacific lead at the PCAF Secretariat. And with PCAF, it's an industry-led initiative. The key aim is to develop and standardize and find a harmonized way to measure greenhouse gas emissions associated with financial activities. So it's industry-led initiative, which means it's led by the financial industry, for the financial industry. And currently where we are, we have just over 390 financial institutions globally, and that is representing 90+ trillion of US dollars in assets. In Asia Pacific, right at the moment, we have around 90 financial institutions. And I remember very vividly because when I first joined PCAF Secretariat, which is acted by Guidehouse, around 3 years ago, we had just 10 FIs at a time. So it's really great to see the momentum and also the tremendous growth in financial institutions that are taking actions when it comes to measuring finance emissions and understanding the greenhouse gas emissions associated with their loans and investment. So I touched up on the word finance emissions, and that's what I'm going to say and what I'll focus on. So yesterday we talked about this journey, on the journey to net zero by 2050, on the journey to achieve the Paris climate goals. So as the first step of this journey, the financial institutions should start to understand the emissions associated with their portfolio. So understanding the baseline, because there is a saying, what gets measured gets managed. So on finance emissions, in greenhouse gas language, or the technical side, is essentially referring to the greenhouse gas emissions associated with loans and investment. So in greenhouse gas accounting language, that is usually referring to Scope 3, Category 15 investment activities. So we are talking about the portfolio level of a financial institution. One of our colleagues from CDP published a research, I think, is saying that emissions from this category is on average 700 times larger than a financial institution's direct emissions. So that's emissions from company vehicles and the buildings. So it's a key climate metric required by many ESG reporting and climate reporting framework. And you may remember from the standard, if you had a chance to look at the standard, finance emission can be calculated using an equation made up of two parts. One part is essentially what we call as the attribution factor. The other part is the emissions from the investee or the borrower. So majority of the challenges or data challenges lie in the second part, because as a financial institution, your investee or borrower's emissions will be related back to you, so will be attributed back to you as a financial institution. So I summarized three sort of key data challenges that I heard from our Asia-Pacific-based financial institution and signatories, and I wanted to share with all of you today. The first one is around the limited availability of reported emissions by corporates, because as you can imagine, to be able to attribute the emissions back, financial data is that can be found easily from the system, the outstanding amount. But actually, if this company is not reporting their own emissions, how can we find that proxy, or what can we do? So from what I heard from APAC-based signatories, usually listed equity asset class is less of a challenge in comparison with some other asset classes, because usually for listed equity, they can find those corporate emissions either from verified third-party data providers or from companies' sustainability reports. So that's usually less of a challenge. But when financial institutions have a portfolio that is mainly made up of, for example, business loans to small, medium enterprises, it can be challenging to gather those data. So one key finding, or what I have seen, is some FIs, especially asset managers, they are actively engaging, which is, I remember there was a panel on active engagement yesterday. So what they are doing is they are actively engaging with their portfolio company to support them on their greenhouse gas accounting journey, which means if their portfolio companies, or in other words, investee or borrowers, have those reported emissions, and they can have good data to use. But it is not the only way, and that links to the next two challenges I'm going to mention for a financial institution and how they can still be able to calculate the finance emissions metric. The challenge two I want to highlight today is this ability to create a proxy and gap filling when reporting is not available. So PCAF provides the methodology to be able to calculate finance emissions, and it is sector agnostic, which means it's really relevant of what industry your investment or your borrowings is in. Is more relating to the asset class, so it's asset class specific. One of the challenges we see is the ability to sort of navigate which methodology to use and how to apply that. And to some of institutions in Asia-Pacific region, this is, the start of the journey, is the first time coming across this exercise, and the idea is to build capacity eventually. So what we are helping out on from a PCAF perspective is we recognize the challenges around implementation, about understanding the methodology to be able to gap fill and create the proxy when actual reported data is not available. And we did set up a technical assistance team for financial institutions in our network to reach out and to support them on this journey. In addition, on this gap filling, if I can just highlight the methodology. So I mentioned earlier the finance emission equation relies on reported emission as the second part of the equation. But when these data are not available, backup approaches can be applied, and that is usually using data such as industry or sector-specific emission factors, as multiply that with production data or economic-related activity data, such as the revenue of a company. So PCAF, we provide to all of our signatory and open source emission factor database that's currently around 3 million emission factors and divided by asset classes, industry, and geographical region, which financial institution can use to create that proxy in their calculation. Last but not least, just one more challenge to highlight is I've frequently received questions on how to understand the quality of the data presented and the reported emissions by corporates. You know, how to understand the different data quality, because usually when FI embark on this data collection exercise, they face all sorts of data. So all sorts of data and of different granularities and certainties. So what we are trying to help from PCAF perspective is, in the standard, we introduce a data quality scoring framework. It is not an exam mark. It is a framework to provide understandings on different data quality type. And what we are trying to do is, at the same time, is because we know we're part of the ecosystem and we are actively engaging with strategic partners to see if there's a way to standardize the data quality scorings in the industry. So that would be the 3 challenges I would like to highlight today. And of course, data is often a challenge, but that shouldn't deter financial institutions to get started and take actions, and definitely look forward to further exchanges on how to overcome some of these challenges I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you addressed those important issues, and also I think PCAF provides some preliminary solution for that. Like the quality, I think you have level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So make things possible. Start from simple, right? So let's move to Simone. So your organization name is Net Zero Data Public Utility. This is new to me. So explain what it is and how your organization addresses the challenge that we just discussed.
Absolutely, yes. So first of all, good morning, and thank you so much to the UNEP FI team for inviting me to join you all today. I'm normally based in New York, so it's really exciting to be here in Seoul with all of you and to be listening to so many climate leaders discuss how they plan to take action. So my name is Simone Kramer, and I'm the head of product for the Net Zero Data Public Utility, or NZDPU. It's a little shorter, still not much, but it's something. Today I'm really excited to be able to share our product vision and what we're aiming to deliver as a proof of concept. And I think that that should actually align quite nicely to some of the challenges that have just been raised. So in terms of what we're seeking to do, one key challenge that the NZDPU aims to solve for is the issue of inconsistent disclosure and collection practices for climate transition related data at the entity level. So at this point, we're fairly inhibited in our ability to fully understand entity level contribution to the global carbon footprint, and that's the baseline issue we're looking to solve for. So to reuse a quote that's one of my favorites from Mike Bloomberg that has already been mentioned, if you can measure it, you can manage it. And in this case, we don't have the information we need in the format we need it to effectively manage the climate crisis. So that's where we hope to provide a solution. So first, taking a step back to provide some more context and to talk about some of the data challenges. Today, preparers of climate transition-related data have a really immense reporting burden. I think that's been echoed through some of the other sessions in the last day. So companies need to report across multiple standards and frameworks, which often express basic disclosure requirements in slightly different ways. So suddenly you see this growth of requirements that firms need to disclose to. And even when disclosure elements are consistently defined, the methodologies underlying disclosure, so how to calculate relevant fields, can be different. So as an end user, when reviewing disclosure, you may actually not be fully aware of the underlying methodology used to calculate a data point, which provides issues in aggregation later on. And adding to this complexity, because there's a lack of a common data model for climate transition-related data, in order to build out data solutions and analytics, individual data providers capture disclosure information in slightly different ways, using their own definitions so that they can ultimately normalize it to build out solutions. So again, what we're seeing is this inevitable compounding of inconsistency and a resulting lack of transparency in the data that we're working with, making it very difficult for an end user, like a financial institution, to aggregate data from multiple sources or even to just find a single source of truth for what they're looking for. And that's when firms actually disclose. So today, only around 30 to 40% of publicly listed companies are disclosing Scope 1 and 2 GHG emissions. And that number drops off significantly when it comes to Scope 3, which has been mentioned as being quite critical. So to address this challenge, in June of 2022, so around a year ago, the Climate Data Steering Committee was launched by French President Emmanuel Macron and Mike Bloomberg, the UN Special Envoy for Climate Ambitions and Solutions. The Climate Data Steering Committee, or CDSC, to bring in another acronym, brought together global regulators, policymakers, financial service providers, and civil society organizations to advise on the key data needed to accelerate the transition to net zero. So the CDSC's white paper, released at COP27, recommended the development of the net zero data public utility to advance the consistency, comparability, and accessibility of climate transition-related data. And the ultimate goal is for this NZDPU, this utility, to live and be designed to fit within the UNFCCC's Global Climate Action Portal. So in order to achieve this goal, the NZDPU will aim to become a trusted central source of verifiable data, specifically climate transition-related data, with an initial focus on standardized emissions data. The NZDPU will be designed to enable actors to more efficiently and more effectively assess the what of an entity's contribution to the global carbon footprint. And we'll achieve this by delivering, first, a common data model for company-level emissions data, a mapping from the NZDPU common data model to all global emissions disclosure standards and jurisdictional disclosure requirements, and by developing relevant data tools and functionality to allow for interaction with the data effectively. It's important to note here that we're not seeking to duplicate efforts or to reinvent the wheel. Instead, we really hope to act as a central repository in a larger ecosystem of actors supporting disclosure globally. And we will provide our common data model as a global public service. So in that regard, we definitely look forward to the opportunity to collaborate with global and regional programs that align with our mission. And I think many are represented here today, which is quite exciting. In terms of what we're going to be building in the short term, so for COP28, COP28 is going to ultimately mark the completion of our first phase of delivery, the first of many, and it's aiming to culminate in a proof of concept to demonstrate the feasibility of the net zero data public utility concept. So we will aim to include a data model for GHG emissions across Scope 1 and 2, a beta model for Scope 3 disclosure, and a data model for non-financial corporate emission reduction targets. And this would ultimately be paired with a user-friendly interface that enables users to access individual entity-level data, as well as aggregate data across our coverage universe. And then ultimately, I think another item that's come up is, I think there have been several mentions of different alliances, GFANs, and also the Principles for Responsible Banking and others. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us to be collaborating across actors in this space. So again, we're very much hoping to use this discussion as a chance to also find interested actors who can provide feedback on our data models and our design decisions to ensure that this utility is truly developed with all stakeholders in mind.
Thank you, Simone. So you are going to launch the data model in November this year? So
the proof of concept.
Okay, great. So really looking forward to that. Yeah, talking about the data experience, I think we should talk to CDP, because CDP have been there for over 20 years, and From my own experience, I also work closely with CDP in Beijing office, and I know that it was quite difficult to ask the company to report and disclose their carbon data, but now things are getting better, but still not easy. So what's your observation in Japan, or in the region if you want?
Thank you. Hello, I'm Miyako from CDP Japan office in Tokyo. So I think many of you has already know about CDP, but just in case, CDP is a global NGO running the environmental disclosure platform to achieve net zero and nature positive economy and world. So let me explain the disclosure situation in Japan first, then a little bit about APAC region. So this CDP Japan sample was initiated in 2006. At the time, we targeted only 150 Japanese companies. Then it extended to 500 companies in 2009, and further extended to cover more than 1,800 companies listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange prime market since 2022. So when the number of target companies increased from 150 to 500 in 2009, there was a request from financial institutions to increase the number. On the other hand, due to the corporate governance code in Japan, prime market listed companies were requested to disclose in line with TCFD, which led to the expansion of CDP's scope to support those companies undertaking TCFD disclosures for the first time. So in other words, the expansion of CDP Japan was a result of the demand of the Japanese market. So the expansion of the demand will expand our data. In 2021, the last year with 500 target companies, the response rate was over 70%, which is very high. So, so in 2022, we have a big concern that the response rate will significantly decrease because of the big expansion. However, in 2022, over 1,000 companies responded, and the response rate was nearly 57%. This covers the 95% of the Nikkei 225 and 83% of the Topics 500. Looking at the other region in APAC, the response rate in 2022 were like Korea Kospi 200 was 50%. Hong Kong Hang Seng Index is 43%. India Bombay Stock Exchange 200 was 45%. And FTSE APAC, excluding Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, was 41%. So this response rate was below 50%. So the Japan's 57% response rate for the prime market was leading in the APAC region. Additionally, Japan has the highest number of climate change A-list companies with 74 companies, so leading in both the quality and the quantity of disclosure companies in this region. So looking at this increase in disclosure, It looks like the corporate governance code may lead this increase of the disclosure. However, but like in other APAC regions, like Singapore or Malaysia, has a mandatory disclosure to be listed in the stock market. So it suggests that it is not solely a policy-driven factor. For example, looking at the China, Chinese companies have only disclosed 16% of CSI's 300 based on disclosure requests from financial institutions. However, more than 2,000 Chinese companies have disclosed through CDP. Why? Not only financial institutions, but the companies from all over the world asking Chinese companies to disclose as their suppliers. So CDP is engaging with financial institutions and also the big purchasing companies to promote the corporate disclosure. To engage with a lot of organizations, we expand the disclosure. So far, I have discussed the current state of disclosure. We can see the level of commitment varies depending on whether companies are exposed to globalization. So, for example, taking the science-based target as an example, Japan has the highest number of companies with 450 whose targets were approved by SBT. And now I have heard that companies are requested to have SBT approved target by investors or their customers. More companies whose business are globally expanded are interested in the SBT setting. However, very domestic companies still not. For example, among 10 major electricity companies in Japan, only one company has set SBT and 7 companies has not even considered setting SBTs. So we have a challenge in the domestic companies. But as an NGO, we have a lot of engagement in policymakers and, as I said, also financial institutions and customers, companies. Together with those stakeholders, we can reach out to the expansion of the disclosure quantity and quality.
Thanks, Ms. Miyako. I think we can learn from your presentation that more information is being reported or disclosed by the company. This is good news. But the challenge is that whether this data can tell you meaningful information and whether the data is comparable and standardized. And I think this is just about carbon data. Of course, I know CDPR now also touch the water data, forest data, but I think the challenge is even more difficult when we talk about ESG rating and ESG data. So my next question will be to S&P Zhongjin, that at least for me in China, is that more and more ESG data provider, rating agency, etc., we provide ESG data rated to the market, but normally the user of the data will ask a question whether the data is comparable and standardized. So what do you see these challenges, and whether this challenge is also the same in Korea or the region, and how you address this?
Thank you, Gang. Well, Before I start, well, I'd like to thank UNEP FI for inviting me to this great opportunity to speak on behalf of S&P Global. Just to start off, I'd like to introduce my company, S&P Global, Sustainable One. I know that a lot of you might not have heard of this. S&P Global has 5 different divisions: S&P Global Ratings, S&P Global Market Intelligence Indices. We, S&P Global Sustainable One, is a single source of essential sustainability data solutions. So we provide all different solutions to, from the financial institutions to the company level. So to answer the question, I'd like to say that ESG data market is still in infancy, but it's growing really fast. We have been hearing from the market that there is a strong need of data standardization in order to compare the data. So the investors have been having difficulties to compare the data because of lack of the data standardization, and it's very hard for them to see what the environmental, social, governance aspects in a one criteria. And also that could also be a hinder to the ESG investing. So as a result, we now see that ISSB and SEC bringing up new frameworks and these guidelines to have more standard data and list of this information, which is very welcoming. However, I'd like to focus that the list of standardization is very important. However, we need to not forget about the quality of the data. So standard data is important, but the quality and the comprehensiveness of ESG data should also be considered as much as important. So let me just start with the quality and the transparency data that Simon also mentioned. So during the last environmental reporting cycle, S&P collects all the different kinds of data from the companies. Also with the help and partnership with the CDP, we collect their environmental data from the CDP directly. We engage with 15,000 companies, which represents 99% of the global market capitalization. We found that 35% of these companies had errors on the data. That's why we had to step in to cleanse this data, which is a large proportion of the whole data set. The largest error category shown was the disclosure not aligned with greenhouse gas protocol standard, which represents that there are still a lot of companies that are not completely aware of how to calculate the methodology or how to calculate the data. So which prevents the financial institutions and companies to seek to compare the environmental data or the ESG data scores apple to apple. We engage with all companies in this data universe to confirm the accuracy of the data, and also we help the companies to improve their data quality and also clarify their environmental and ESG data. I'd like to also mention about the comprehensiveness of the data. So there is a rise for demand for comprehensive environmental performance data. While there are different approaches to take this, we believe, S&P Global believes that it is crucial, it is essential to apply a detailed methodology that can capture companies' diverse business activities. I'd like to take an example here. So there is a company in US or in any other countries. 89% of their business activities are coming from power generation. The company only discloses 89% of scope 1 emission in their website or in their sustainability reports. This is where S&P plays a role in it. We know that there are 11% that's not captured in that database. So we see what business activities they're working on within the 11%, and then we apply the very specific business detailed activities, proxy data within their business activities. So we have experience that if we use very high level, simple sector revenue data, we will see a very big difference between the actual emission and the emission that's been calculated with rough data. So that's why it is very important to have a very comprehensive, to fill in the blanks and have a full picture of the data of the companies. So standard data is very important, but having the standard data of list of information cannot solve all the problems. Therefore, I'd like to focus that it is very important to have the quality and transparent data and also the comprehensive data. And also, not to forget that how we use this data in a meaningful way. So I guess our role in SMP, our role is to provide a level of experience data, quality imperative, how we cleanse like large proportion of the data, and also to provide the meaningful data by combining the ESG scores, ESG data, the detailed data you mentioned, the environmental data, the physical risk data, the carbon earnings data, and to provide the signals to our clients.
Thank you, Yongjin. We managed the time well, so we still have around 15 minutes. But I don't think we can address all this challenge in 15 minutes. But I can see there are quite a lot of challenge, and we have some solution to address the issue. But I think I just want to focus on two things. One, what regulator can do, because according to the discussion, you guys also mentioned the policy really did change the market. For example, the TCFD and regulator or stock exchange in different regions, including Japan, adopt TCFD, and this really drive the change. So what regulation and what regulator can do? And second, there's no perfect situation, so data will not be perfect in the next 2, 3, 5, or 10 years. So if we still have this imperfect market, imperfect data, what the market can do, right? So this is the reality that we need to address. So we focus on these two things, and I will ask the regulator or policy questions to Tiange and Miyako, and then the market questions to the rest too. Tiange, would you like to go first?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the question. I think, like mentioned previously, that ESG risk reporting and data, a bit unlike financial reporting, where data is a bit more standardized and limited to a few more commonly understood KPIs or key performance indicators, because a company's performance on ESG and climate risk is comprised of hundreds of qualitative and quantitative data points. So going back to this question, I think I will focus on how policy can influence financial institutions in its data collection to help with measuring their finance emissions. So I think first thing I would say is regulations and policy, they are an enabler for entities to start reporting, and this can eventually lead to increasing data for financial institutions, because if there will be regulation and policies for corporates to report their greenhouse gas emission, ultimately financial institutions will have higher quality or more data available. For example, we see regulators adopting the TCFD guidance as the basis for many ESG reporting regulations. And just to give example, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, they plan to make it mandatory for company listed to make climate-related disclosures. Of course, the ISSB also includes key metrics on greenhouse gas emissions. So with these policy in place, they will encourage entities to report and ultimately lead to more transparent data. But I think it's also worth to mention that, yes, for more impactful approach to better data, I think as financial institutions can also consider maybe active engagement, especially for those non-listed companies. The other thing I want to mention to sort of answer your questions, Pei Yuan, I think is I want to give examples on how financial institutions can work directly or engage with policymakers to result in better examples. And I want to share some examples on how PCAF signatories or coalitions are doing, or how they are working on that. So PCAF, we have established national chapters in different jurisdictions when there's a critical mass. And I like to give an example from the PCAF Netherlands coalition, which was first established back in 2015 and is made up of PCAF's founding members. They had a bit of issue with gaining good quality data for residential properties, and mortgages is a crucial asset class for these founding members of PCAF. And there was a unique collaboration that results in measurement of carbon dioxide equivalence emissions based on actual energy data of those residential properties. So to be able to improve the data quality of the greenhouse gas emissions from the mortgages book, the Dutch PCAF participants, they collaborated with the Dutch Central Bureau of Statistics to make available the actual energy data from grid operators. Of course, taking all privacy and data protection rules into account. But the results were published at aggregated level, and ultimately those 7 PCAF signatories, they were able to gain data of higher quality and ultimately allow the calculation of mortgages book and allow a better steering on the road to the Paris climate targets. So I gave you an example of the PCAF Netherlands coalition, but I also want to link it back to Asia Pacific, because in Asia we have also formed coalitions. So PCAF Japan coalition, chaired by Mizuho Financial Group, was formed in November 2021 and is supported by CSR Design Green Investment Advisory. We also have a coalition in Korea, PCAF Korea Coalition, that was established in November 2022, chaired by KB Financial Group with COSIF Korea Sustainability Investing Forum as the local secretariat. So with these coalition, I think we see leadership directly from the financial industry, coming from the financial institution to further promote the expansion of measurement and disclosure of finance greenhouse gas emission. And this coalition definitely demonstrates how financial institutions can foster a very strong collaboration which will enable signatories to improve their data quality collectively and steer their portfolio in line with the Paris Agreement. So that would be my response to the question. And yeah, I look forward to further collaborating with institutions in this region. Thank you.
Thanks, Chenggu. And Miyako?
Yes. So for the regulatory role for the enhanced disclosure, I think, as I mentioned before, the mandatory disclosure is not enough. So to enhance the quality of data, I believe that facilitating the understanding of the data and from the investor side is the key point. So as we have already discussed, there is a lot of data points and there's a lot of scores or ratings we can use. But which data point or which rating should we use for what investor decision making? So financial institutions should have a clear policy of the investing, and which data point they should use should be clarified. By doing so, we know that which kind of data should be more good quality. Then we can discuss with the companies to enhance their disclosure quality. So recently in Japan, before only asset managers or insurance companies are interested in the ESG integration, but recently more banks are coming to us to ask why this company's score get this level, on what background of this data or this methodology. To understand this kind of background of the data or ratings by financial institutions will facilitate the quality of the data.
Thank you. Thank you, Miyako. I think it's important to understand more about the data and explain the nature of the data. But for me, I think it's the market that's to decide which data they should use and which data point they should use. Because if you ask different asset management firms, they may use different data points, even if they obtain the data from one common source. So I think these are the things that we can leave to the market. So that's also my last question, and we realized that we only have 5 minutes for Simone and Yongjun. So would you like to tell us your opinion that if the market is not perfect, if the data is not perfect, then what the market can do, what the market players can do?
Sure. So I think to kick off, the first thing I would say is a reminder, and this has been mentioned quite a few times in the last day or so, but climate change is a collective problem and it requires collective and collaborative solutions. So I think in order to really solve for these types of challenges, we need to see mobilization across both the private and the public sector in parallel. In terms of where the NZDPU seeks to fit, what we're really thinking about is how we build in critical market infrastructure that will ultimately support greater integration of climate data into decision making. So again, providing that information in a single format in accordance to a common data model to increase efficiency of use of the information. But I think it's also important to remember that while data is certainly a catalyst for change, we will not be able to achieve net zero goals without making several other changes in parallel. So first off, I think it's critical that we consider the development of incentive mechanisms for data disclosure. Now, this is really coming from regulators and policymakers driving market actor response. This needs to be paired with appropriate capacity building for disclosure, especially for firms that are early on in their disclosure journeys. And this needs to be reinforced by engagement with and appropriate financing of real economy actors, and that includes SMEs. I think we've discussed throughout the last few sessions the criticality of also incorporating small, medium enterprises into the story. So, I think, again, while challenges with data may take time to resolve, the urgency of the climate crisis means that we cannot allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good either, and we cannot allow this to delay critical actions that can be undertaken in parallel while key infrastructure is being developed. Instead, we have to move together towards our collective goal of mitigation.
Thank you. Thank you, Simone. Yongjin.
Yes, well, that's a very interesting question. Let's start off. But to give a general idea in the beginning that, even in emerging markets or developed markets, it's getting pretty clear that we need good quality data in order to get financing. So I guess the sustainable financing is actually a very good key driver to encourage the companies to disclose more accurate data, Many countries not yet have these mandatory regulations, including Korea. Therefore, I strongly encourage the companies to partner up with the data providers like us, and also the third-party verifiers to fill in the gaps within the data. In addition to that, to meet the net zero pathways, yesterday there's been a lot of discussion saying from the banks and from the companies that we need to have, the banks need to have an accurate and consistent data to achieve net zero. So an increasing pressure of the supply chain can be a great example here. So we are expecting to see a lot of pressure to the supply chain to collect the more accurate data from their supply chains. So by giving more pressure to them, we are expecting to see a more advanced or an enhancement of the data quality in the near future. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I think we are running out of time, so I'm just going to close the section by a very brief summarizing. I think according to the discussion, we understand that ESG data, of course, or climate data, it's really an important infrastructure when we talk about ESG investment, green investment. No data, no future, I would say. It's a very fundamental issue. The good news is that we have more data. The bad news is that we have a lot of challenges. But I hope according to the discussion, we can identify some challenge and some best practice, because we never be perfect. So we can only do things in an imperfect world, but we have some best practice that we can see how to address this issue to some extent, and that's good enough for today, but not good enough for tomorrow. So we still need to work hard for that. So with that, I want everybody to join me to thank all the 4 panelists, 4 ladies here. Thank you for your input, and thanks for joining us.